Okay, so again, thanks for coming. We're Public Agenda. We've been around for several decades. Our job in the world is to help communities in the nation address tough problems more effectively by bridging the gaps between leaders and the public, helping build common ground around solutions. We do research, we do stakeholder engagement, we do communications, all towards those ends. You can learn more about us at our website at publicagenda.org. And the piece of work that we're going to talk about today is a study that was funded by the Lumina Foundation, based in Indianapolis, and the largest private foundation committed to higher education reform, enrolling and graduating more students from higher ed. So you can learn more about them from LuminaFoundation.org. You can see the website there on your screen. This is a piece of research that's in a long line of research for Public Agenda. You'll hear more about that in a few moments when John talks about the results. John, whose voice you heard briefly, is the principal researcher for this project, so I'm just going to introduce it and hand it over to him in just 1 minute. But we've spent the last 20 years or so looking at the views and oftentimes the evolving views of really critical stakeholders to improve that are involved in higher education, including, as you'll see, college presidents, faculty, students, what the public thinks, etc. And now we're adding trustees to our family of of stakeholders that we've been trying to understand where they're coming from on these issues. And we think the value of this kind of stakeholder research is twofold. One, it informs policy making right now, today, because it kind of tells you what, how people are thinking about issues and what the kinds of ideas that they favor and things that they have a hard time with. And it just helps to think through the policy questions in the present, but it also helps us understand how to engage these stakeholders in important conversations and initiatives for change over time. So it kind of opens up possibilities for bringing new people into the conversations that need to happen in order to help things improve. So that's sort of our purpose as an organization in getting into this kind of work. We think that understanding the roles of trustees and other stakeholders is more important today than perhaps it's ever been because of the incredible challenges that's facing higher ed and therefore facing students and therefore employers and the nation. Costs are going up, funding is going down, more and more students need to be educated, want to be educated. Many of them aren't as prepared ideally to succeed in higher ed. International competition is ramping up and putting pressure on the nation to graduate more and better prepared students. Trustees have obviously an important role in making higher ed institutions work and succeed. And so the question is sort of what role are they playing? How active are they? What are sort of their starting point attitudes towards needed change, those kinds of things. And in some instances, if you follow the news on these sorts of issues, you know that trustees are pretty active in terms of pushing policy agendas in various states. Maryland, Arizona, and Texas are a few examples. Depending on how you view these issues, you may or may not feel that the things that they're advocating for are the right things. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, depending on your point of view. But they are active in a few instances. We want to kind of get a broader picture of where trustees stand and sort of the average trustee and really inform the ways in which we might be able to engage them in terms of what needs to happen in higher ed. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend John Immerwahr to talk more about the study itself and kind of how we went about it and what we learned. So here we go.
Thanks, Will. Let me get going here. So first, let me tell you just a little bit about the report itself. So we interviewed 39 trustees from all sectors, except we did not include any of the representatives from the for-profit private institutions. They're kind of a special category. And we really spoke to them in confidential, off-the-record interviews, promising people that we would not reveal their identity. And they were very frank and straightforward with us. And if you have a chance to look at the report, which we'll give you the website for, it's really filled with quotations from the trustees. And they're very interesting and give you a lot of depth. Now, this is, you must understand, not a survey. This is qualitative research based on a relatively small number of interviews. So, as our founder, Dan Yankelovich, used to say, qualitative research has all the advantages and disadvantages, the opposite of a survey. So you can't really project it to a larger population, but it's incredibly rich because it gives you so much detail on how our respondents spoke, and I think it'll be very suggestive in thinking about the future. And as Will mentioned, this is really part of a family of studies we've done. We've really boxed around the compass here. We've talked to college and university presidents. We've talked to business and legislative leaders. We've talked to faculty, which is a very interesting group, has a completely different view from anybody else, chief financial officers, and of course a long series of studies of the general public and some very interesting studies of young adults. So we'll draw on that as a little bit later. So just let me give you an overview of all the trustees we talked about. And first of all, these folks are very serious about their responsibilities and their institutions. I think the days when trustee was a typically older male grad and was mostly interested in football and that sort of thing, that's gone. These people are really committed to their schools and know some things about them and are trying to be as helpful as possible. And especially, of course, with the immediate problems that are presented to them by their institutional administration. So, for example, one trustee I talked to, his field is real estate, and the institution is seeking to buy some real estate. And he said, well, I was very helpful to them, told them what they need to do. An IT representative trustee said, I sit on the IT committee, I advise them. So they're really engaged trying to be helpful to their universities. And if you look at the trustees in a broader way, there's some, broad levels of consensus among all of those we talked to. Remembering, again, this is not a projectable survey. And first of all, everybody knows that higher education is facing major challenges, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And everyone is concerned about improving access. And especially they've really got the idea that as important as access is, retention in some ways is every bit as important. That is to say, as one trustee said, we know how to recruit them, but we don't know how to keep them and get them to graduate. So a lot of interest in the whole problem of access and retention. And especially for those in public institutions and regional institutions, providing a trained workforce for their region. One of the trustees said, I'm not going to tax grandma to educate somebody who's then going to move to some other state and pay taxes there. And they've all learned the lesson of doing more with less. We heard about universities where nobody's gotten a raise for 3 years, and we've cut this and we've cut that. So, and nobody thinks the goldie oldie days are coming back soon when there's more money every year. So those things are common to everyone we spoke to. Now, when you think about, now I'm going to speak more about the majority of trustees and that we spoke to, and then I'll speak to a kind of smaller group, a minority in just a moment. So they have this group some things in common. First of all, many of them are loyal alumni of the institution for which they're now a trustee. Now, I realize in a private institution you expect that, but many of the trustees in public institutions are appointed by governors or some other legislative way, but still, usually they have some long association with the institution. Many served on other committees before they became a trustee, and they are very excited about their institution. And as I suggested before, they tend to have the issues that they're dealing with be the ones that are framed by the institution. I talked to a very interesting person who had been both a trustee and then a vice president of a higher institution, education institution. And he said, let me set the scene for you. A board of trustees might have 25, 30, even 40 members. They're meeting a couple times a year for 3 or 4 hours, and they have a lot of items to cover. And so, they're not going to go into a whole lot of depth on anything, and they're not going to raise questions that are really far out. They're just trying to hear what the report is, and give some solid information or ask a few basic questions. So it's not a format where people typically go way out of the framework. And their primary job, as many of them saw it, is to select good leadership, a solid president who they support, and of course many of the trustees had selected the president of their institution, and then provide advice and expertise on the issues that they were presented. And a mantra among a lot of trustees is sort of they all went to the same conference. Well, we should avoid micromanaging. We don't want to get into the details. We're a policy board. And when you ask people from the larger group of trustees about the many challenges that higher education faces, you also hear a kind of consistent pattern. And the message is that while higher education has many internal issues that we're struggling with, but the main challenges are external, outside of the institution. And the primary one, of course, is funding. One trustee said to me, there are really three issues in higher education: funding, funding, and funding. And they told dramatic stories about their own funding. One trustee said, in 5 years we've gone from 60% of our operating budget carried by the state to 35% just in 5 years, and who knows what the future will go. And they'll also talk about we're a labor-intensive industry, and so we don't have the normal productivity things that another company could do in manufacturing or something like that. And so we're constantly overwhelmed with new expenses, with regulation, since Virginia Tech with more security, and so on. So all rising costs, decreasing funding. The second major external thing that people will talk about is what they sometimes call the pipeline, that students are just not as prepared as they used to be. One trustee from a joint 2-year, 4-year system said, in our 2-year institution, 44% of the students need remediation. In the 4-year, well, it's down to 38. So they're struggling with these very real problems. And what are the responses that they're talking about? Well, generally, they fall into a pattern. And one is cost cutting, that we've got to find ways to reduce our costs without cutting too much into our quality. One person said to me, this was in a 2-year institution, he said, we're now down to 75% adjuncts and 25% full-time. If we go any lower than that, we'll lose our accreditation. We can't cut that anymore. So whatever they can do, larger classes, more adjuncts, constant array of things that can save a little money, shave a little here and there. They're also quite inventive about finding new sources of revenue. One trustee we talked to said, well, in our institution, we have a cap on how many out-of-state students we can take, who, of course, pay higher tuitions. But we've discovered that international students don't count against our out-of-state quota. So we're taking more international students than we've made $1 million or whatever it is. They are all, of course, as I said, very concerned about retention, and we heard a number of very sophisticated approaches to maintaining retention, from case management, mentoring, monitoring these students. But I think what they all had in common is a hands-on interpersonal connection with students. And I would have to say that these trustees in the kind of majority group of those we spoke to have a kind of ambivalence about technology. On the one hand, universally they say, yes, for non-traditional students, for older students, for people in the workplace, of course, it's got to be distance learning. They don't have the time to come in for classes. But for the traditional 18-year-old students, I think many of them went to colleges themselves where the personal connection was very important, and they're saying, we're very concerned that this has limitations. That's where we're seeing a lot of students drop out. They're not learning as much. So a lot of concern about technology. Now, let me turn to a smaller group among these trustees who took sort of consistently a different position. When we asked them what the most serious challenges to higher education were, they typically stressed internal factors, internal to higher education, the structure of higher education. They spoke of higher education as kind of a mature industry, like the auto industry maybe in the 70s, where there was just not a lot of flexibility. Let me just read you one quote from one of these trustees. He said, Our nation has an education model whose calendar was based in the 19th century agricultural calendar, whose classroom is based in the 20th century industrial model, trying to produce a high-quality product in the 21st century global technology-infused environment. We're never going to be successful until we can completely disrupt the model of our classroom and the model of our teaching that's been pervasive in the entire continuum from kindergarten to graduate degrees. Other people compared higher education to the 12th century model of the education, or others to healthcare. One person said, you know, it's like the faculty and the administration are like the doctors and the insurance companies in healthcare, adversarial. And a couple of these people said, and you know, financial crisis is an opportunity. That's when, in business, that's when you really learn to create value for your customers. So the responses that they talked about, well, one person said to me, if you ask trustees what the problem is, they should tell you that trustees are part of the problem. This person said, in our board meetings, the trustees talk a lot about cost, expenses, but I rarely hear them talking about value and the value that we're providing. And they will typically say, we need to provide new modes of delivering education. They'll say, a lot of the distance ed that we're providing, other people are providing, is just putting our PowerPoints online. We've just digitalized traditional methods of teaching. And they see enormous untapped potential in technology, including for remediation. They say these students, the students coming in now, this is the digital generation. They want, they want to be able to get their class at midnight. They want it when they want it, and the technology could really help prevent professors from having just to say the same thing over and again, but work individually with students. And it's a subtle difference, but they emphasized productivity, not cost saving. In other words, let's say you were trying to save money, and you say, well, we're not going to give anybody a raise for for the next couple of years. That's cost saving, but that's not what these people are talking about. These minority of trustees that we interviewed are talking about finding a better way to educate people, not just holding the line, not just preventing the deterioration of quality, not using that image I heard, cutting the fat without the muscle, but doing something better, doing something more effective, and we'll pay people more if that's what we're happening. So, whereas when we talked to a lot of the trustees about the notion of productivity, they said, productivity, I never really thought about that as a higher education concept. So the clash between productivity and cost saving, I think, is very interesting. Now, where do these trustees fit in to the larger picture of those other stakeholders with whom we've interviewed? Let me take just a second on that. So we talked in the project called Iron Triangle to a number of college presidents, and they took a kind of consistent view, which is sort of what we've heard. We're caught between rising costs, declining state support, and problematic K-12. And most of them said, and this is certainly what they say in an interview, yes, we can make marginal increases in productivity, but the solution has to be a public reinvestment in higher education. Government, state, and national has to see higher education as a public good benefiting society, not a private good. And they'll tell you for every person we graduate, that's taxes and paid and less unemployment and all that. When we talk to business and legislators, on the other hand, we heard about the need for a better educated workforce and a better educated citizenry, but the solution they called for is kind of more like our minority trustees, greater productivity, new modes of doing things. When we talk about faculty, again, they take a completely different position. Their view is, many of the faculty members we talk to say, the problem is not we need more people in colleges and universities. The problem is we have too many students in higher education who really can't do the work, who don't belong there, who aren't motivated, who aren't prepared, and they're dragging the standards down. We need higher standards and really produce a highly educated person, a group of graduates. The public, for its point, is sort of caught again between the rising price tag of colleges and what they see as threatened access and at the same time a growing necessity for higher education. So their view is protect access. Now, where do trustees fit in? Well, since trustees are not really a univocal, coherent group of people, they come from all different constituencies, they sort of scatter. Many of them, as you would expect, take pretty much the same view as the president. We need more money. Others who come from business often have that more business perspective. Let's have more productivity. Not too many have the faculty perspective, but since many represent public institutions, many are primarily concerned with access and cost. So they don't fit into a coherent pattern, which is another reason why we emphasize the phrase still on the sidelines. So I hope you'll have a chance to look at the report. Very interesting. Let me pass you back now to Will.
Okay, so that pretty much brings us to the end of our presentation, except to just reemphasize what I was saying at the outset, that at least for us, we think this kind of research can be really helpful in terms of thinking about how to engage folks. And that's sort of what it does for us as an organization. And we're working on a lot of higher education reform issues on both the policy and the institutional level in a number of states. Part of our job is to figure out how to frame these issues and how to provide opportunities for better conversations among the people who are going to have to make the changes if we're going to, move the needle on some of the issues in higher ed that are confronting us, such as productivity and student success and graduation rates and things like that. So we're hoping that, by taking some time to really listen to trustees, we can, that's going to help us figure out ways to help them join the conversation moving ahead. And speaking of joining the conversation, it's time now to turn to you, our audience, to hear from some of you and the kinds of questions or reactions that you're having. So we want to give an opportunity for that now. And to do that, as I said before, if you could raise your hand by hitting that button. Do we have people lined up yet? Okay. Just see if you can find that. If you have a question, if you raise your hand by hitting that icon, we'll unmute you and you can let us know what you think.
Daniel McNary.
Oh, I'm sorry. Will and John, this is Dan McInerney from Utah State. Am I being broadcast right now?
You are.
Okay. I'd like to ask a question of both of you. First, John and Will, thank you for a very clear presentation, and the slide information showed up beautifully. I'm curious about one of John's last points involving the perspective of the broad perspective of trustees and the broad perspective of faculty that has been learned from past studies. I'm also involved in a Lumina project. The Lumina project is Tuning USA. It's a project of academic reform and assessment, but it's faculty-led. I've been working with Lumina for 3 years on this project, and I'm wondering if I should be alert to, let's just say, a prevailing cultural difference between the outlook of trustees and perhaps their disinclination to look favorably on faculty-led projects of academic reform? Or are we not in as antagonistic a relationship as that question suggests?
Well, first of all, it's interesting. When we talked to the trustees and we said, how do the faculty feel about what you're doing? A lot of them said, oh, they're fine, they're great. But when we talk to faculty is where we hear the disconnect. And once I was actually at a conference on the notion of productivity, and I happened to do since I was there, it was a Lumina conference, I did a focus group in the same area. And so I went to the focus group and I said to the faculty members, how would you feel about the fact that there's a conference in the same town on increasing productivity in higher education? They went nuts. They said, that's a terrible idea. You're just talking about having people work harder for the same money. And if you tell our administration to graduate more people, they'll graduate as many as you want by inflating the grades. But so a lot of faculty members, and actually I found this more, and again, these are focus groups, so we're not talking a projectable survey, but I found this even more with the people in the four-year institutions are feeling very alienated, very left out. So I think that what you are doing, which is a faculty-led initiative, is great, and I think trustees will be receptive to that. But what I'm worried about is that most faculty have not yet been brought into the conversation. They feel like this is all being talked about somewhere else and nobody's interested in their views, and I don't think we're going to have any interesting progress without including faculty, because they are the ones who have to actually do the teaching.
And the kind of work you're doing is something that we've been thinking a lot about, and we've done quite a bit of work studying what are the most productive ways to frame issues for faculty and to help them join, sort of the conversation that needs to happen around how can institutions improve their performance. Leading with the word productivity isn't necessarily a smart idea for the reason that John just said, but there are other ways to help them get into the conversation, and it's not a matter of being devious. It's just a matter of meeting people sort of where they are and using the language that they can relate to, such as student success and things like that. So if you see on your screen an email address for Allison Rizzolo, for Allison Rizzolo, and you, in addition to asking her for the trustee research, we have another piece called Changing the Conversation on Productivity, which is focused on faculty and various sorts of work we've done, sort of experimenting with ways of engaging them and how to frame issues that make it easier for them to participate effectively and things like that. So you might find that interesting. I will also just echo John. I don't think there's anything in the research that would that should lead you to predict at this stage that trustees will somehow have a hard time with what you're doing with faculty. I think you should maintain an open mind about that. I think the point is that trustees haven't been that explicitly engaged on a lot of these issues, and I know from other experience that I know some people that are doing trustee conferences and meetings on student success and various sorts of institutional efforts to improve student success, and they've been incredibly meaningful and positive. So I think it's a matter of just kind of sharing the work that you're doing and keeping an open mind about it and seeing what happens, and we'd certainly be interested in hearing about it.
Thanks very much to both of you. That's very promising. And if I could just make a pitch to the rest of you on this webinar, that material from Public Agenda on beginning the conversation is extremely valuable. This was presented at a productivity conference this past August, I believe. I had a chance to attend that conference. It was the game changer for me at the conference, the ways in which Public Agenda was guiding the narrative that people construct about these academic reforms. So congratulations, Will, on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that, certainly. Okay. Well, we really appreciate your attention today, and we hope you found it useful. And again, feel free to email Allison with any follow-up questions about any of our research or anything else, and we'd be glad to engage with you afterwards.
And do look at the report. I think you'll find it very interesting.
Thanks so much, folks. Take care.